most recent episode, we chronicled two crimes. The first was the cold-blooded murder of John Campbell in front of his home in White Rock, Ogle County, Illinois, on the 27th of June, 1841. The second was the vigilante lynching of two men, John and William Driscoll, father and son, by more than 100 armed men in Washington Grove in Ogle County, Illinois, in the afternoon of June 29, 1841. Neither of these crimes had yet been resolved in the court of law.
Newspapers began reporting the Campbell killing and Driscoll lynching within a few days of the events. One of the first was the fledgling newspaper The Rockford Star, with editor Philander Knappen. Knappen was born in Vermont in his early 30s, was married with a young family, and was a devout Christian. On Thursday, July 1st, just 2 days after the Driscoll lynching, Knappen published an editorial in the Rockford Star condemning the actions of the lynch mob, as well as publishing two additional editorials, one in favor of the lynchings, signed with the pseudonym of B, and reportedly written by attorney Charles Latimer, and a second letter strongly against the vigilante actions, signed under the pseudonym Vox Populi, and believed to be written by Jacob B. Miller. Within a few days after publishing this edition, Knappen arrived at his printing establishment to find his printing press trashed and his office turned upside down. The vandalism was widely believed to have been the work of the Regulators, and was later reported as having been done by 3 men, including Charles Latimer. Within short order, Knappen sold the printing press inventory along with his subscription list to John A. Brown of the competing Pilot newspaper, and removed himself and his family from the area.
In the meantime, the news spread further afield, across Illinois, the surrounding states and territories, and even to the east coast of the United States, including New York newspapers. Not surprisingly, the reactions were mixed. Some newspapers supported the vigilante actions, or were at least in sympathy with the intentions, while many others condemned it.
Back in Ogle County, and weeks after the lynching, members of the Driscoll family quietly moved the remains of John and William Driscoll from their shallow graves in Washington Grove to more properly cut graves on the Driscoll farmsteads in South Grove and Monroe townships. One later report indicates that John Driscoll was buried nearby the Killbuck Creek, but that his grave had to be moved a second time when a rain-swollen Killbuck threatened to wash it away.
David Driscoll, the primary suspect in the Campbell killing, was still nowhere to be found and was believed to have left the state, most likely heading west of the Mississippi, which was as yet mostly untamed United States territories. However, others implicated as being the second murderer, including William K. Bridge and one of the Aikens, appear to have been apprehended and questioned in the weeks following the John Campbell murder, but were released, perhaps due to having strong alibis. And so attention as to the identity of the second murderer of Campbell turned once again to the Driscolls, with the finger now pointing at young Taylor Driscoll, just 17 years of age, who became yet another Driscoll proxy for the community frustrations of not capturing Brother David. According to records of later trials, Taylor Driscoll may have actually been present at the lynching of his father and brother, but appears to have disappeared shortly thereafter, likely sensing the danger of his situation.
But the other crime, the lynching that had happened in plain sight of the community and the law, was going to be prosecuted. And this may have been at the suggestion of Judge Thomas Ford, as well as some of the leading regulators, as they may have understood that doing so would help remove the stain of illegality and vigilantism from the events of June 29th. And so in the weeks following the lynching, a grand jury was convened in Ogle County, which included some of the regulators. Later reports indicate that they used a warehouse building a few blocks to the southeast of the burned courthouse for their deliberations, near First Street and Madison Street in Oregon. This grand jury ultimately produced indictments for 112 men for the murders of John Driscoll and William Driscoll, and their trial was planned for late September, when Judge Ford would make his second visit to Ogle County on his circuit.
The Regulator trial was to prove to be highly irregular and perhaps unique in its place in jurisprudence history. The Regulators, the 112 men named in the indictments, all met on Sugarloaf Mound, just to the northwest of the town of Oregon, and surrendered to Sheriff William T. Ward. They were taken into some sort of custody, likely based on personal recognizance. Sugarloaf Mound was a natural formation that was said to resemble a sugar loaf cake, hence the name. It is located to the west of 6th Avenue, between Illinois Street to the north and Jackson Street to the south, in Oregon. During the trial, Sugarloaf Mound was also used by the defense attorneys to meet with and counsel their clients. The short trial took place during the week of September 20th to 25th, 1841. The attorney for the prosecution was Seth B. Farwell, an Illinois State's attorney whom we met earlier as a liaison for Judge Ford to the Regulators when they were encamped along western DeKalb County, Illinois, in mid-June. For the defense were attorneys Abraham R. Dodge of Ottawa, John D. Caton of Plainfield, Onslow Peters of Peoria, and John C. Champlin of Ottawa. On the jury sat several of the Regulators named in the indictments.
In spite of the fact that there were perhaps 200 to 300 witnesses of the lynching, only a few witnesses were called by the prosecutor Farwell. But Farwell apparently failed to establish intent, nor could he even establish the fact of the murders, as the bodies of the murdered, the Driscoll corpses, had been removed to places unknown to the legal authorities. One gets the distinct sense that no real effort was made to prove guilt in this case. Not surprisingly, when the time came for the jury to convene and decide on the fate of the defendants, they did not bother to leave their seats, but instead unanimously pronounced them not guilty of the charges, effectively absolving them of the illegality of the lynching. Here again, regional newspapers were mixed in their reactions, some in sympathy and some in condemnation of the so-called trial.
But one aspect of the trial for which we will be forever grateful is that by naming the 112 men involved in the lynching in the court record, it gives us an opportunity to more closely examine the membership of the Regulators and the men involved in the Driscoll lynching. By using U.S. Census records and other contemporary records, we can get a real sense as to who these Regulators were, rather than just an anonymous group of men. From these sources, we learn that the vast majority, about 75% of these men, were residents of Ogle County, with about 10% coming from Winnebago County to the north, and the remainder from other Illinois counties. They were fairly young, the average age being in the early 30s, with 2/3 of the men being between 20 to 39 years of age. There were also several teenagers in the mix, along with a few men over the age of 60. As to their occupations, about 15% were professionals and merchants. Another 15% were tradesmen and laborers. And 2/3 of them were farmers, who perhaps felt the most vulnerable and unsafe to the depredations of criminals, living with their families in the more remote sections of the region.
Judge Thomas Ford, whose judicial reputation might have suffered from the irregularities of the Regulator trial, found that his political reputation had conversely soared and unexpectedly became the Democratic candidate for the Illinois governorship, which was then the more conservative party on the ballot. Ultimately, he was elected as the 8th Illinois governor in late 1842, just a little over a year after the Regulator trial. Ford served one term as Illinois governor, not pursuing a second term, due to his own health issues as well as that of his wife. While nursing his wife Frances, who suffered from stomach cancer, he wrote the first comprehensive history of Illinois, before his wife passed in October of 1850. Ford himself died just a month later, at the age of 49, as a result of a prolonged battle with tuberculosis. The guardianship of his unfortunate 2 children was divided up among friends and relatives.
In Ogle County, Sheriff William T. Ward continued in his position until 1844. A new, smaller county courthouse was built in 1845, followed by a new, stronger jail in 1846. Although crime and criminality may have been lessened in Ogle County as a result of the Driscoll lynching, the effect was only temporary, and crime, even more audacious and bold, returned within a matter of a year or two. The so-called banditti of the prairie were far from cowed by the Regulators or the Driscoll lynching. In September of 1843, the William K. McKinney store in Rockford, Winnebago County, Illinois, was robbed. A few weeks later, a bold stagecoach robbery occurred just 4 miles west of Rockford. The infamous Mulford robbery took place the following year in 1844, with the home invasion and robbery of the William Mulford family at Guilford, 4.5 miles east of Rockford. The year 1844 also recorded the home invasion and robbery of Postmaster George Haskell at Inlet Grove in Lee County, to the south of Ogle, a crime for which William K. Bridge was implicated as an accessory and was sentenced to 7 years in the state penitentiary. The boldest criminal act of all, however, would come the following year, in July of 1845, when several men broke into the Rock Island home of Colonel George Davenport, a prominent citizen, and robbed him of his money and beat him to death. Of the 5 men convicted of this crime, 3 were hung, 1 escaped, and 1 had his death sentence commuted to life in prison. Of the 3 men who were accessories to this crime, 1 was given a life sentence, a second was given a 1-year sentence, while the third was released with the charges dropped. Robberies and murders continued to vex the area for the remainder of the 1840s.
So what became of the rogues and scoundrels that we learned about in the first few episodes of this series, the men who were said to be plaguing the Ogle County area with crime? We've already learned that William K. Bridge was eventually convicted of being an accessory to the home invasion and robbery of George Haskell in 1844. Prior to that, Bridge had filed for personal bankruptcy in January of 1843. The fact that he had done so demonstrates that he was not in hiding and was no longer seriously considered as a possible defendant in the Campbell murder. After serving 5 years in the Alton State Penitentiary, his sentence was commuted, and he was released in 1850. He eventually moved to Texas for a period of time, but then ultimately ended up in St. Louis, Missouri, where he died in 1870.
Norton B. Royce, who had been given a 1-year sentence related to counterfeiting, was pardoned by the Illinois governor Thomas Carlin in October of 1841, serving only about 1/2 of his sentence. Much later in life, in 1870, Royce was again arrested for counterfeiting, this time while operating a hotel in Kansas. Royce died a few years later in Missouri at the age of 57. Dennison Waters, who had been sentenced to 5 years in the penitentiary for larceny, was given a reprieve by Governor Ford in 1845, after serving 4 years of his 5-year sentence. Waters' cellmate and colleague, George Terrell, also sentenced to 5 years, died in the Alton prison, which was the fate shared by approximately 5% of the prisoners at this time. Franklin Dewey served out the term of his 1-year sentence in the Alton Penitentiary, related to forgery, and was released in April 1842. Dewey appears to have been implicated in subsequent crimes in the years that followed. Asa Daggett, who suffered a severe whipping at the hands of the Regulators and was told to leave the area, nonetheless continued living and farming in Boone and Winnebago counties until his death in 1848, at the age of 50.
And what became of the John Campbell family in White Rock, Illinois? Margaret Clendenin Campbell managed to hold on to the family's farm in White Rock Township, in spite of having lost her husband and the father of her children. Much of the farming responsibility almost certainly fell onto the shoulders of their eldest son, Martin, who was but 13 years old at the time of his father's death. Margaret Campbell also appears to have been helped by neighbors and friends in the area, who likely felt a special indebtedness to John Campbell's family. She was well-liked and respected within the White Rock community, and served as a pioneer nurse and midwife to many in the area. By 1857, Margaret parceled up much of the family property, consisting of over 300 acres, transferring it to her remaining living children, Martin, Eliza, and Alex, while she retained a smaller portion for herself to live on. She died in 1866 at the age of 66 and was buried alongside her husband John at White Rock Cemetery, Ogle County, Illinois.
The Campbells' eldest child, Eliza Ann Campbell, who had married Erastus Rice, one of the named Regulators, shortly before her father's murder, had at least 3 children, Henry, Esther, and Homer. They lived and farmed in the White Rock area for most of their lives. Erastus Rice passed away in 1890, while Eliza died in 1892 at the age of 70. Both were buried in White Rock Cemetery, just a few hundred feet from John and Margaret Campbell.
Martin Salisbury Campbell, the brave young man who attempted in vain to avenge his father's murder, married Elizabeth Ellen Seckler in 1855. Martin purchased land about 1 mile east of the Campbell farm, where he managed his 280 acres for the remainder of his life, becoming one of the pillars of the community. Martin and Elizabeth had 6 children, daughters Sarah, Jessie, Cora, and Harriet, and sons John and James. Elizabeth Seckler Campbell died in 1879, while Martin passed away in October of 1904. They are buried just a short distance from Martin's elder sister, Eliza.
Margaret Caroline, who was about 9 years old when her father was killed, married Hiram Hayes of a prominent family in the area in 1849 at the age of 16. Unfortunately, she died within a year of her marriage and was buried in the Bethel Hayes Cemetery at Kings, Ogle County, Illinois, just 3.5 miles southeast of White Rock.
The fate of Alexander Campbell, just 5 years of age at the time of his father's murder, is uncertain. He lived with his mother until the early to mid-1850s, likely providing much of the manual labor for his mother's farm in her later years. After that, however, it is difficult to trace his life with any certainty.
As we've already learned, the community of White Rock installed a large inscribed stone on the Campbell farm in 1906 in honor of John Campbell's death, just a few years after Martin Campbell had passed away. 24 years later, in 1930, the White Rock Grange Society had another large stone monument to John Campbell commissioned, installing it nearby his grave in White Rock Cemetery.
And what finally became of the Driscolls, the infamous clan that loomed so large in eastern Ogle and western DeKalb counties in the 1830s and 1840s? David Driscoll, the purported murderer of Campbell, left the area without a trace the day of the murder in June of 1841, leaving behind a wife and 3 children to their own fate, as well as the ensuing lynchings of his father and elder brother. He was never captured, although there were reports of possible sightings and rumors of his death for many years to follow. He likely spent the remainder of his life west of the Mississippi, possibly dying in 1850 in Missouri.
Mercy, or Mary Akins Driscoll, who was 55 years old at the time of the murder and lynching, and who still had 4 children in her household, was appointed as administratrix of her late husband John's estate, along with Driscoll neighbor Levi S. Hobart. As John Driscoll had died intestate, in other words, without a legal last will and testament, his estate would be required to go through probate, a lengthy legal action which takes a careful inventory of the estate and ensures that all debts are settled before the estate can be transferred to legal heirs. The first court appearance for the probate case was in mid-July of 1841, just a few weeks after the lynching, where Mercy Driscoll and Levi Hobart were appointed as estate administrators. However, after this initial court appearance, Mercy Driscoll appears to have no longer appeared in court for the subsequent probate hearings. Probate records denoting that she had left the county by May of 1843 and had possibly gone to live with her second eldest son, Pierce, who had also moved out of the county. For her absence and noncompliance to the probate hearings of her husband's estate, Mercy Driscoll was issued a citation and fines. Given all that had occurred, the entire probate proceedings may have been particularly galling to her, and she seems to have effectively told them to pound sand, although it does appear that the Driscoll property did eventually transfer to her nonetheless before her death. Newspaper clippings suggest that she passed away before mid-1848, as there are then advertisements regarding the partitioning of the Driscoll property amongst the children.
Margaret Lozier Driscoll, the wife of William Driscoll, in her mid-30s, had 7 children in her DeKalb County household at the time of her husband's death. Margaret Driscoll denotes yet another strong association with the Brody family, as her mother had remarried a Brody after her father's death, and so most of her siblings were Brodys. Like Mercy Driscoll, Margaret was appointed the administratrix of her late husband's estate, along with DeKalb County Sheriff Morris Walrod, whom you may remember from an earlier episode. Walrod's role seems to be more in support of the Driscoll family rather than supervision, as the William Driscoll family continued to have strong support in his home county, and Margaret Driscoll was remembered as a popular member of her community. Margaret Driscoll was to ultimately pass away in 1887.
The probate inventory of the William Driscoll estate, taken in the autumn of 1841, is revealing, not so much for what is there, but for what is not there. Perusing the detailed list of belongings, we see 1 bay mare, 1 brown colt, 3 red cows, 3 calves, 2 steer, 11 hogs, a few plows, horse harness, a wagon, a few tools, a quantity of corn, oats, wheat, and hay, some modest household furnishings, and kitchen utensils. In short, his household appears to have had all the trappings and accoutrements of a modest prairie farmer at that time. His net worth at his death was carefully calculated by the probate inventory as $1,236.49, or about $180,000 in 2020 dollars. If he was indeed a crime boss, one of the heads of a multi-state crime syndicate, always staying one step ahead of the law, as reported by the area rumors and newspapers, he apparently did not profit from it.
Taylor Driscoll, who was only 17 years old at the time of the Campbell murder, also fled the area shortly after the lynching, perhaps hearing the circulating rumors implicating him in Campbell's murder. When he was 21, after 4 years had passed, perhaps thinking it was safe to return, he ventured into nearby DuPage County, about 60 miles due east of Ogle County, likely visiting the farm of his brother Pierce, and where his mother may also have been staying. Here he was apprehended by Ogle County authorities, likely based on information provided by William K. Bridge after his arrest related to the Inlet Grove robbery. Taylor Driscoll's first trial in Ogle County resulted in a mistrial, but then his lawyers managed to have his next trial moved to McHenry County, as they argued that within Ogle County there was a lingering and strong bias against the Driscoll family. The concluding trial of the John Campbell murder then occurred in April of 1847, almost 6 years after the fact, with Judge Jesse B. Thomas presiding, and attorneys Alonzo H. Berry and Isaac N. Arnold for the defense. Margaret Campbell appeared as a key witness in this trial, and stated that she was certain that Taylor Driscoll was in fact the one who had shot her husband. Under cross-examination, however, the defense was able to demonstrate that Margaret Campbell, although confident of her identification, nonetheless had a difficult time telling one Driscoll from another. As a result, Taylor Driscoll was found not guilty and was released.
Taylor Driscoll then volunteered in the 2nd Illinois Regiment of Illinois Volunteers, serving in the Mexican War from August 1847 until July 1848, under Colonel James Collins. As a result of his service, he received a land bounty in the late 1840s for 160 acres in Flag Township, Ogle County, a few miles northwest of Rochelle, in what is today the area directly across from Rochelle Township High School. He did not stay long, however, likely owing to the fact that the Driscolls were still generally reviled in the area. And so he sold out and left the area by the early 1850s. Eventually, he made his way out to faraway Utah territory, where by 1888 he was collecting a small pension due to his service in the Mexican War, and hoping that he had finally left the Ogle County affair behind him.
The youngest son, John Driscoll, Jr., who was about 11 or 12 years old at the time of the murder and lynching, stayed in the Ogle County area until the early 1850s, time enough to marry a local woman, Sarah Jane Walker, start a family, and to farm in Flagg Township. However, like all other Driscolls, by the late 1850s, he too moved far away, taking his family to central Wisconsin, to Juneau County, where he farmed for the remainder of his life. In 1864, in his mid-30s, he enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War and served for 1 year as a private in Company C of the 16th Wisconsin Infantry. John Driscoll, Jr. died in 1880 at the age of 52.
Which brings us finally to Pierce Driscoll, who, like Jonah, was in the belly of the beast in late June of 1841. Before being released by the Vigilantes due to a lack of evidence, and escaping the brutal death experienced by his father and brother. Pierce had likely seen enough to know that he needed to take his family out of the area, and as soon as possible. In 1843, he acquired a land patent for 80 acres in Bloomingdale Township of northwest DuPage County, land which today straddles North Avenue along the western edge of Gary Avenue in what is today Carroll Stream, Illinois, along a heavily commercial transportation corridor. At that time, North Avenue did not exist, and Pierce Driscoll's newly acquired property lay just a short distance north from St. Charles Road, one of the few roads in the area. And his farm would have been contemporary with Stacy's Tavern, a local inn located 3 miles to the east at what is now Five Corners in Glen Ellen, Illinois.
With the death of his father and older brother, Pierce assumed the difficult mantle of family leadership, being the second eldest. And so it is likely that it was here in northwest DuPage County, to Pierce Driscoll's farm, where Mercy Driscoll came till the end of her life in the late 1840s, and where Taylor Driscoll visited, ultimately resulting in his high-profile arrest in 1845 for the Campbell murder. In the years to follow, Pierce, along with his wife, Mary Brodie Driscoll, farmed their 80 acres until his death in 1866.
He was buried in Forest Hill Cemetery at the southeast corner of Rifford Road and St. Charles Road in Glen Ellen, Illinois, about 3.5 miles to the east of his farm. And it is here in this cemetery that you can witness one of the last throes of the Driscoll and Brody clan. Here amidst the graves in the northwest corner of the Forest Hill Cemetery are the family plots of the Driscolls and Brodys, still together after generations, the last remnant of the clan that struck fear into the hearts of residents of Ogle County and north central Illinois.
Further to the west, in Ogle County and surrounding counties, despite the deaths and departures of most of the Driscoll family from the area by the mid-1840s, area newspapers still continued to report on crimes and activities related to the dreaded Driscoll gang. The Driscoll family name had been forever transfigured into local lore and legend, becoming synonymous with villainy and crime. By the 1860s, as northern Illinois became more settled, communities matured, and the area expanded its institutions for justice and law enforcement, the infamous banditti of the prairie, whether a real criminal organization or simply a loose association of the criminal element, slowly faded into the collective memory of the community and the mythology of the landscape.
We hope that you have enjoyed this series, as it is indeed a gripping and remarkable tale. In the making of this series, we owe much to the Ogle County Historical Society, especially Michael Burnett, Chris Gilbert, and Janice Carlson. And we strongly recommend that you visit them to learn more about this story and this remarkable community, which has thrived here for almost 200 years. The museum is a treasure, filled with artifacts, memorabilia, and genealogical materials, and is open to the public 3 days a week. The Historical Society is located right here in the town of Oregon, Illinois, at the southeast corner of Franklin Street and 6th Street, just a few blocks away from the courthouse and jail, where much of this story took place.
And as always, please like, subscribe, and comment if you are so inclined. Your likes, subscriptions, and comments truly help us out and guide us as we work on new series and stories. Be sure to watch for new videos in the coming weeks as we head out on yet more historic and prehistoric adventures.